Wednesday, everyone. We're approaching 2023. These are the last days of 2022. So I want for you to take this time to kind of analyze what happened in 2022. What do you take from it? What things are you going to just leave behind and not bring to 2023? And I also want to thank you so much for all the support. Last week, I spoke about my abuelita. That was the first episode. This second episode, I want to talk to you about my abuelo Juan. This is the reason why my name is Juan, because of him. He was my maternal grandfather, and I share a lot of beautiful moments with him. He was a second father to me. He was there with me since the moment that I was born, and uh, he wasn't expecting my grandma to say, "Hey, we're not going to go back to Mexico. We're going to stay here in Dallas." I know that at first it wasn't in his plans to live here, but I know that at the end he really enjoyed having that bond with his grandchildren. He was originally from Durango, which is a northern state in Mexico, and he was a handyman. He was so good with his hands. He could build anything. There was one time where, and I'll tell you all that little story later on, but I'm just gonna give you a little preview. We had doves, or I think, yeah, they're doves, and he built an enormous cage, and it was so big that us as young kids would go in there. So it was pretty cool. It was a great experience. I remember him being outside working on something. He had the entire floor filled with tools, and he was very uh, he didn't let anybody touch those tools, and he was always listening to Aletas Linares, which is a Mexican group. And today I want to share with you a little story that happened with my abuelo. And the reason why I want to share this story is because I think it was very unique, very common. I and the most important thing of it all is that I was a big part of it. So my grandfather he had a first marriage, and he had a son, but I never met him. Growing up, he talked a lot about his son, and he would even go and spend weeks, go visit his son in Mexico. And I think this was prior to my grandmother getting sick, so he would definitely take off and visit him quite often. And let me kind of put things in perspective so you can have an understanding on how things were back then. I'm not 1,000% sure, but in small towns in Mexico, they only had one phone for the entire town. So somebody from long distance would call that phone. The person that was there would pick it up, and then they would send someone to go to the family member's house and let them know, hey, someone from long distance is calling you. Come to the place. They're gonna call you back in 5 minutes or 10 minutes, however long it took for them to get there. And that's how my grandfather kept in communication with his son. I'm not sure in what moment. I want to believe that it was that moment when the cell phones became popular, and that one phone no longer existed. I want to say that was the time that my grandfather and him lost communication. To add on, this was a time where we were at the house taking care of my grandma. So my grandfather was really occupied being a caregiver to his wife, that he didn't have, or that time to go out and kind of see what was going on with his son. Years passed by. I want to say, I want to say more than 10 years passed by, where it was a constant, hey, I want to go there. I want to go find him. I'm not sure where he's at anymore. And as I begin to get older, I would say, well, I agree. I think that we should find him, but I don't trust getting in a vehicle, you and I driving across the border to a place where I've never been. I don't know anyone there. Things have changed. This was also when the cartels were really rough in Mexico. So I was like, I don't want to expose ourselves to that. And believe it or not, it was a big responsibility that was kind of like that I kind of adopted. I don't believe he had that intention to throw that on me. I simply felt that it was my obligation and duty to help him out. There was one time where he got really sick. My abuelo got really sick, and he's like, "I really don't want to leave this earth without seeing my son again. Please promise me that we're gonna go." And I began to think, God, I ask for a favor. Please allow me to gift this chance to my grandfather, to my abuelo. And then I began to think, well, everyone has social media at some point here. There's so many platforms. So let's begin with Facebook. My uncle doesn't have my grandfather's last name, so that was going to make it a little bit more complicated. And whenever I went to the search bar and I put the name and the last name, I had several matches, but one of them stood out the most because physically he resembled my grandfather so much. He was younger, so I was like, this can't be my uncle, but it could be a cousin. So then I decided to, and then another thing happened, that the place where they were born was the same city or town that my grandfather had mentioned, but the only difference was that they were now living, or it showed that they were living in a city here in the States. So I sent a message and I said, "Hey, I believe you're related to me. My grandfather is Juan, and I'm trying to find his son." So I waited. I waited for hours. I waited for days. I waited for weeks. The weeks turned into months. The year approached, more than a year. There was no activity in that account. No one had seen that message. So I literally was like, well, there goes that possibility. One night, I was out with my friends and I decided to spend the night at my friend's house. This was maybe close to 2 years later. I wake up and I go straight to my phone to check my messages, and I had a response to that message. And the guy turned out to be my cousin, and he said, "Yes, my dad talks so much about my grandpa." And I began to cry. I began to cry, but it was out of happiness. I was like, wow, I'm going to have the chance, the opportunity to take my grandpa so my grandpa can see his son. So then we exchanged numbers, we texted back and forth, and I was like, could you please provide me with the telephone number, address where my grandpa can call Mexico and speak with your dad? And he's like, well, my dad is not in Mexico. My dad is here with me. So I was like, no way. That was perfect. That meant that I didn't have to expose my grandfather to the uncertainty of going into Mexico and me not knowing how to navigate over there at that time. So he was in the States. The city was maybe like 8 hours away from where I live. So we coordinated something the following week, and we took off to go meet him. Myself to meet him for the first time. It was my mom, my grandpa, my abuelo, myself. When we get to my cousin's house, the moment that I saw them hug and reunite, I promise you, it was like if someone lifted this huge bag of bricks that was on my back. I was so happy to see that. I was so happy because I got to meet my uncle for the first time. I got to meet my cousin for the first time. And what really intrigued me was that even though I grew up with my grandfather and I saw him every single day of my life, I don't resemble him. I really don't look like him. We really don't think like we were so different. And then I get to see his son and his grandson, and they look alike, they talk alike, they even kind of like think alike. So it was really, really cool to see that. And I felt so blessed for to have given that gift to my grandfather. And I promise you, my grandfather after that was like, "Can you explain to me again how you found your uncle?" And imagine me saying, "Well, there's this platform called Facebook, and I kind of put his name in there, and my cousin appeared, and then I got in contact with him." It was like if I was speaking a different language. So that was really cool to see his facial reactions when I was explaining to him what was going on. And it was really neat for them to see each other because we didn't know that that was probably going to be the last time that they were going to be able to see each other. Because shortly after that, we came back to Texas, to Dallas, and my grandfather began to kind of get a little bit sick. He would complain about having just feeling dizzy, not being able to breathe right. So one day we took him to the ER, and while he was at the ER, he was in the room first. So maybe minutes later, I walk in there, and when I walk in the room, he has approximately 10 to 12 medical staff there with him. And they are just laughing and trying to have a conversation with him. He didn't speak English, so it was only Spanish, but the individuals there were trying their best to have a communication with him, a conversation in Spanish. So I get there, and they're like, "How are you related to Mr. Juan?" And I was like, "I'm his grandson." And my grandfather in the background was like, "Oh, es mi nieto. That's my grandson. That's my grandson." And they were like, "Well, we're very amazed that he's 90. I think he was like 92 at the time. He's very strong. He's very alert. It's not common to see somebody his age be that alert." And then they were like, "But we're gonna keep him overnight because we did ask him how he was feeling, if he had any pain, and he started pointing everywhere." And that was very typical of my grandfather. If there was a medical staff or someone in the medical field asking him, "Do you have pain?" he would point everywhere. So I could only imagine what he was doing with them. So the next day, they let me know that um, they found something in the X-rays in the lung area. So they scheduled an appointment the following Monday with this like a specialist. So my grandfather and I go, and then the doctor pulls me aside and tells me, "Look, your grandfather has lung cancer, and from what I see, it's already stage 4. So I estimate that maybe a year that he'll be living." So he gave me different options. I didn't relate the message to my grandfather. We went home. I talked it over with my mom, my dad, and my sisters, and we decided to be more. We were already very present with my grandfather, con mi abuelo, but this time we were more. We wanted to like, kind of like record every instant of us being together, and gave him his medication. We of course fed him. And this time when we were feeding him, it was like we would have a deeper conversation as he was eating, and it was super funny because I was like, "Are you hungry?" And he's like, "Well, not that much." And I would serve him his eggs with a little bit of salsa, his beans, tortillas, maybe a little bit of potatoes, and I would present the plate to him. And he was like, "No, that's too much food. I'm not gonna eat all that." I'm like, "Just eat what you can." So then I would turn around and I would continue talking to him. Maybe I was washing dishes or whatnot. I would turn back and the plate was completely cleaned. And I was like, "I thought you weren't hungry." He's like, "Well, I thought so too." So so beautiful little moments that we shared. Not only myself, but I know my sisters did too. Especially my youngest sister Alicia. She was only like 4 or 5 when my grandmother passed away, so she doesn't really have memories of her, but she definitely has memories with my abuelo. Close to that year, I guess deadline that doctor gave me, he began to get more sick. So this time around, I took him back to the ER because he couldn't breathe. So they discovered that he had liquid or fluid behind the lungs that was preventing the lungs to expand. So that was making him feel like he was the shortness of breath. So they did an incision. They removed the fluid or the liquid, and my sisters and I, had to learn how to change all that. So here we are once again taking care of my abuelo. It took us back to those moments where we were taking care of my abuelita, and it was the same thing: the bedside commode, cleaning him, feeding him, giving him a bath, giving him his medication. I was in charge of taking care of him at night, and then the girls and my mom would do it during the day. And his sisters would come and spend time with him, so that was beautiful. And once again, there was moments where he would have just difficult little fragments of the day where he was sick. He was either in pain or he wasn't feeling good, and it was really difficult to witness once again. But this time around, I think I was able to regroup with the girls and with my mom, and they were older, so this time I did feel their support. I did feel them there next to me, and it gave me that strength to push through. And whenever the end was coming, I would speak with God, and I was like, I ask you, when you decide that it's time for him to go, let me or one of the other girls be present. I don't want the youngest one, and I want my mom to be by themselves. Well, I think God understood the message differently, because in reality, the only two people that were there when he passed was my mom and my youngest sister. So the moment I get the call from my youngest sister, I understood, and I knew that was it. And I rushed back home. We we handled everything. He had a beautiful viewing. He had mariachi that day, and I will always remember him, and he's always with me. And I know that right now he's in heaven playing his harmonica. He loved that, and I know he's up there with my abuelita. And he was a very important person in my life, and he was stubborn as no one else. He was 92, riding his bike, taking off, and there's videos where I'm running after him like, Abuelo, come back, and he just looks back and continues pedaling. So he was definitely a character. He had very iconic phrases in Spanish, and he was the stories that he would talk to me about when he was back in Durango when he was a young boy. I promise you, those were Western movies. He would talk about everybody with a gun and shooting and on the horse. Honestly, whenever I watch Bonanza, which that's a show that he loved to watch, I was like, I bet this is how he was living life back in Durango. But that was a story that I wanted to share about my abuelo. Thank y'all so much for being supportive and for messages and whatnot. And like I said, today is Wednesday. Today's a sad day as well for me because my papa Ticho on my dad's side, my dad's father passed away yesterday. So next week, what I'll do is I'll maybe dedicate a video to him, because I already talked about my mom's side and how they impacted me so much. But even my dad's side, even though I didn't spend a lot of time with them, but I did spend my summers out there. So there's a lot of beautiful little stories that I have, and I'll share those with you next week. Everyone, please be safe this new year. Enjoy everyone's company. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to y'all next week. Happy New Year.